Okay, so our next guest is very close to our house here. He has been collaborating with us in all the virtual events that we've had this past few months. All the way from Mexico is Mr. Roberto Salinas-Leon, addressing the challenges of liberty in the Americas in an era of radical uncertainty. Roberto Salinas holds a BA in political economy, history, and philosophy from Hillsdale College, Michigan, and an MA and PhD in philosophy from Purdue University, Indiana. He has been an adjunct professor and visiting professor of political economy at the Escuela Libre de Derecho, Universidad Autónoma de México, and Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de México. He was also visiting professor at Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala, also friends of the house. He is currently senior debate fellow and debate lecturer at the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation and an adjunct scholar of the Cato Institute. He has published more than 2,000 editorials in English and Spanish on public policy topics, including pieces in the Wall Street Journal. So please welcome Roberto Salinas-Leon.
Thank you very much for such a kind presentation. I see many familiar faces in the room, and I see new faces as well. And it's great to be with all of you through these incredible technologies that allow these communications to be possible. I know that other speakers have already been through Zoom being able to share their thoughts and their comments and their discourses with you, and I look forward to these next few minutes to share with you this rather bombastic title, The Challenges in the Americas in the Age of Radical Uncertainty, which is so ambiguous that it allows me to talk about whatever I want, which is more or less what I guess what I'm going to do. Again, I very much want to thank Liberty International. Very much regret not being in beautiful Medellin. My wife is from Colombia, so Colombia to me is like a second patria, segunda patria, and it's really a shame. But I know that in a post-COVID environment, we will be able to be together again. Special thanks to my Alejandra Londoño for all her phenomenal efforts. Un aplauso desde México. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to be presenting, let's see if I can find it, here we go. I'm still a bit of a nincompoop when it comes to these things, but I think you see there the title page, and there are many challenges that I think from our point of view have emerged in this era of radical uncertainty, which began even before the pandemic hit us in the first quarter of last year. And I'll explain a little bit more about this remarkable concept of radical uncertainty a little later on. So obviously one of the challenges, and especially with the pandemic, is what Carmen Reinhardt has called, "This time it really is different." This is a take on the title of her now famous book, co-authored with Ken Rogoff, 8 Centuries of Financial Folly. This time is different. It's an ironic title because those of you that know the work, the idea is, you know what, it's never different. Every time these crises over 8 centuries, you go back and analyze them, and it's always the same thing. Expansion of money supply, fiscal irresponsibility, over leveraging public debt, bad management in the bad incentives or perverse incentives in the financial system, toxic products, etc. So it always comes back to the same issue, except that in the pandemic, she says, this time it really is different. Why is it really different? Because basically, after the 15th of March, after the World Health Organization declares the pandemic, we have with us the equivalent of a zombie economy, where there's no trade, no demand, no supply, tremendous volatility, tremendous currency depreciations everywhere, and of course, an environment governed by radical uncertainty. Now, whereas we were able to quickly adapt to these circumstances and trade disruptions began to lessen, and we began to see the recovery of demand and the recovery of supply, and the great debate about whether lockdowns were necessary or not. I side with those that claim that they were not necessary. That given some provisos, I think we can follow a much more flexible policy. And indeed, curiously enough, Mexico's followed a much more flexible policy than other countries. Obviously, with negative results as far as the contagions and as far as the unreported deaths are concerned, but that's another story altogether. Be that as it may, one of the great consequences, one of the great challenges that emerges in the midst of the radical uncertainty environment produced by the pandemic is how to cope with the zombie economy and what the post-pandemic recovery is going to look like. Now, this is very important, in my opinion, because there's a tremendous fiscal and monetary overhang that we're going to have to cope with in the following years, with very large fiscal deficits that in Latin America, at least, we had not seen since the lost decade of the 1980s. There are some people that have talked about a new lost decade in Latin America. A tremendous public debt. Some of the percentages of public debt to GDP ratios, whether that's relevant or not, are really, they have skyrocketed in many countries. And the ghost of inflation, which many countries in Latin America have thought they have surpassed, well, it's now back with us. And so we see already, hyperinflation in Venezuela is no longer a story. This is something that we've known for some time, and that it's underreported, and that really there's no, the Bolivar is the most unreliable, it's as unreliable currency as we've had in the past 200 years. But signs of inflation are picking up in places like Colombia and Mexico, even some Central American countries that have already achieved a relative price stability. And of course, other places like Argentina, they're already on the verge of yet another hyperinflationary crisis. So this is really something of concern, where we thought that the macro was behind us and we can now focus on the micro, so to speak. Well, no, now we're going to be facing very radical, very important macroeconomic challenges as we move forward. My personal opinion, since I've been involved in issues concerning trade for many years, the disruption in global trade, and especially the rise in the sentiment of regional protectionism, which it sounds nicer to say nearshoring, but at the end of the day, many of the proposals, especially many of the proposals coming from the Biden administration, supposedly opposed to Trump's protectionism, well, now we see that it's not only the same or even worse in some cases, and the whole Buy America is really a departure from the expansion in global trade that we had seen in the past few years. And this is going to significantly hurt opportunities for growth and opportunities for greater prosperity. One issue that we perhaps can address in the Q&A is clear and present danger is the shift to digital currencies. So despite the enthusiasm that cryptocurrencies have generated, even leading countries like El Salvador to actually ratify its legal tender or forced tender, there's a big debate about that nowadays. Cryptocurrencies and digital currencies are two very different things. In the case of digital currencies, the way that China is looking at it, and certainly the way that the Bank of International Settlements is contemplating, that's the idea of having basically no more financial intermediation. You open an account with the Bank of International Settlements. That's where your currency assets are going to be held directly without an intermediary, with practically no privacy. And there's the specter of Big Brother watching you. No, Big Brother being absolutely all over you. So I don't know where this debate is going, but I think these are voices that at these forums and at other opportunities, we have to come up and say no to decentralization of digital currencies, because that really would be surrendering one of the most fundamental aspects of human privacy. which is your own holdings and your own financial affairs. It's my business, it's not Big Brother's business. Now, on the political front, we also have some tremendous challenges. Perhaps even more worrisome than the economic challenges that, as you see, are already gargantuan. What Tom Palmer, my colleague at Atlas, calls the rising tide of liberal populism in Latin America, something that began way before the pandemic, but the impulse, the autocratic impulse, or what in Latin America is called Goliath, has become multiply pronounced as a result of the lockdowns and of the pandemic. The idea of what Octavio Paz called the ogro philanthropic, the philanthropic ogre, promising everything for free, whether it's health insurance or ping pong rackets or free education or free this, free that, free the other, whatever. This is now being seen practically in every corner of our political culture in all countries in Latin America. Part of what sustains this, the false romance of these narratives are a system of clientelism, or what Octavio Paz called patrimonialism, which is nothing other than the typical crony capitalism that we all know and hate, and that is really something that we need, that there needs to be a general onslaught against this, as well as a differentiation between what some have called crony capitalism and capitalism or open capital markets properly understood. I think there's some very good work that is being done here, but this is absolutely necessary in order to curtail the expansion of the liberal populism that is being seen. Colombia has already gone through it and is going once again in the next year with their presidential elections, is going to have to cope with the ghost and the specter of Petro, the way that Peru has done with Pedro Castillo, very unfortunately winning the election. There, Chile, which was a tremendous surprise in 2019, but now the ghost of Salvador Allende seems to have been resuscitated over there. And of course, there are other places like Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Uruguay especially, that we greatly admire. The leadership that Guillermo Lasso in Ecuador, that Luis Lacalle Pou have undertaken against all odds in their countries. So there are some shining spots. It's not all bad news. Yet, nevertheless, the rise of autocracies and the collapse of reasoned discourse as a result of the fatal conceit that I know so much more than you do. I'm the one that is going to be giving everyone and everything for free. That has unfortunately cemented a highly illiberal culture, and is one of the great challenges for the voices of liberty and for those people that are united today in these kinds of forums. And that's why these reunions have become so utterly important. I won't go into the democracy index. I'd just like to reference it. It's a neat metric from the Economist Intelligence Unit. But you see what the tendency there is as far as liberal democracy is concerned. I'm not going to talk about it now because of time constraints, but I greatly recommend a wonderful book in defense of liberal democracy that was written by the great Manuel Heinz, former finance minister of El Salvador. And I think one of the keenest minds as far as what disruption, the technological revolution, and the current culture of liberalism signify as we move forward. So we are surrounded with false narratives amid an environment of radical uncertainty. There's this polarization of public debate that I already mentioned, where it's us versus them. It's those guys versus the other guys. It's the rich against the poor. It's the left against the right. It's López Obrador in Mexico saying that he's the incarnation of popular will versus all those corrupt, neoliberal, horrendous creatures that simply do not want to embrace the public. The ghost of neoliberalism, as you may have debated already, in Latin America, neoliberalism is practically a scarlet letter. It's the kiss of death, and it's a terrible concept because from a point of view of Logic 101, it's the perfect way to beg the question. If you're signaled out as a neoliberal, debate is over. Debate is over. It's like saying, well, pedophilia is bad. Yes, absolutely. It's a horrendous thing. Well, neoliberalism is something similar in that respect. It's a way of silencing your opponent by calling him or her neoliberal, and so it's become a weasel. And it's become a concept that by definition is something bad. You know, it's a mixture of the 1%, plus the technocrats, and maybe even Lord Voldemort in the mix, and there you have it. And it's very unfortunate that we have to waste our time to deconstruct a straw man in the way that this concept has been abused and has been even the likes of Evo Morales, the former president of Bolivia, saying that it's the neoliberal forces of conspiracy and the CIA that have wrought a biological warfare through the pandemic. That's the kind of debate that we're having nowadays, and that is absolutely shameful. And all that is going to lead to is polarization, the us versus them mentality, or what Fukuyama has called the politics of identity. One thing that's very unfortunate about this, and is certainly a great challenge that lies before us, is that policy decision-making in many countries, we're going to see it in Peru now, with Pedro Castillo, we've certainly seen it in Mexico, Venezuela, of course, for many years now. Decision-making becomes a function of a very toxic mix of ignorance. No, ignorance is bliss, in a sense. I mean, if you confess your ignorance, and I don't know about the subject, but you surround yourself with people that can engage in discourse and in civilized conversation about it, that's okay. But if you mix that ignorance with intolerance, and then also profound resentment as a basis of decision making, then you see the type of policies, very toxic policies, that many Latin American countries are beginning to adopt. And not just in Latin America, throughout the world. Now, instead of trying to make our lives more simple through the false ideal of a utopia on earth and the caudillo, or the illiberal populist that comes to claim that I know so much more than you do, and that horrendous paternalism, that condescending paternalism that, like little animals, Lopez Obrador once said, I have to take care of Mexicans as if they were little animals. Reminds me of Animal Farm and why all pigs are equal, but some pigs are certainly more equal than others. Rather, let's embrace radical uncertainty, and let's 3 cheers for the fact that we know very little about the world. Very, very, very little about the world. This wonderful book written by a former governor of the Bank of England and Oxford economist John Kay, they claim in this book that you can see in Radical Uncertainty, I just finished reading it a few weeks ago, and this quote that I very much wanted to share with you. Humans thrive in conditions of radical uncertainty when creative individuals can draw on collective intelligence, hold their ideas in communication with others, and operate in an environment which permits a stable narrative. Within the context of this narrative, uncertainty is to be welcomed rather than feared. In politics and business, uncertainty is a source of opportunity for enterprising, though also associated with a paralysis of decision-making in bureaucracies staffed by risk-averse individuals who claim to know a lot more than we do and everybody else. And that type of credentialism becomes an enemy of freedom and an enemy of that disruptive spirit that characterizes an open economy. So let's embrace radical uncertainty. I see it almost as a restatement of Hayek's fatal conceit, the fallacy of the fatal conceit. It's let us be free, let us do, let us work. There's nothing illogical about that. It's simply common sense as far as everyday men and women, or what Amity Slaves would call the forgotten men and women. Look at Cuba, for instance, that I'm sure has been a source of discussion. Here are these youngsters, these wonderful rappers that come out with this fantastic video that that I really commend that you see it and you listen to it. John Stossel recently had a fantastic editorial at Stossel TV on YouTube. You can Google it, Cuba Libre and Stossel, and it'll come up. And he features there a translation of Patria y Vida and what they're saying. So we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or maybe Black Lives Matter, Vivian Rios, this big influencer in Mexico. Even the Jacobins saying, oh, it's the horrors of the US embargo. What these people are claiming are food and medicines. That's not true. It's true that they don't have any medicines. It's true that they have a tremendous scarcity of food. But what they were claiming was freedom, libertad para Cuba, patria y vida, as opposed to homeland and death. It's homeland and life, patria y vida. What a beautiful message. And because of saying this, they've been put in jail, they've been tortured, some have been freed, some have been jailed once again. And we have the Castro regime, Miguel Diaz-Canel, still trying to use the Fidel Castro methodology. There's also a video on YouTube where he openly claims tolerance is absolutely intolerable. The revolution must go on, and whoever's opposed to it, we have to get rid of it. I really commend that you see this fantastic video by John Stossel. Of course, there's a ton that's been written about this Miami Freedom Forum that is conducted by our friend Roberto Salinas-Leon in Miami. A fantastic episode today dealing about SOS Cuba. And it's incredible that even some would-be journalists and pundits are saying that all of this is a conspiracy of digital disinformation. That Stossel and Gloria Alvarez and that even the State Department and everybody, they're misportraying the situation and they're creating a false narrative or a virtual reality of the situation. Well, I've met the people from Patria y Vida. I've talked to Ana Meli Ramos, our colleague and friend Frank Zimmerman with Pasa Virtual, and the magnificent job that he's done trying to portray that's all we want. It's not ideological, it's not a conspiracy, or what Antonella Martin, my colleague at Atlas, would say. Is this what, a conspiracy to be free? Are you going to call that a conspiracy? So you see, it's unbelievable when we should be thinking about how Cuba can transition finally to be a freer economy and empower its citizens with opportunities. Instead, we're talking about digital disinformation, and Alexandria is using this as a way to, it's the US embargo that just caused it. Not only is that false, by the way, factually false, because there's no embargo on food and medicines. Besides, what could be more libertarian than free trade? What could be more classical liberal than let people trade between each other? It's not about Cuba el país, Cuba the country. It's about let Cubans trade and let the spontaneous order take hold and let the price system be the language that is going to determine, as it does in the informal economy, in the real black market in Cuba, and the way the Cubans have done in the case of Miami. Let them be free and let them be. I know that my time is running out, but I think this is one of many, many other debates that can point to the fact that today one of our challenges is to cope with these false narratives. Now, last year, The Economist, in their wonderful Bello column, Andres Bello, of course, the great Chilean, stated something very weird and seemingly weird for many in April of last year. In April, in the midst of the worst aspects of the pandemic and the lockdowns, this should be Latin America liberalism's hour. Liberalism, classical liberalism, the ideas of liberty understood as we understand it. Just assistance, check power and privilege, equal opportunity before the law, tolerance instead of bigotry, science instead of ideological quackery. And this reminded me of former editor of The Economist, Bill Lemon, somebody I greatly admired for many years. And in his book, after he left the position of editor, 2020 Vision 2021, in other words, a vision for the 21st century, he says, perhaps the classical liberal, those that are voices of the ideas of liberal, of liberty, they should be engaged in the hunt for humbles. The humble liberal has to be aware that when we have come up with solutions to political and practical problems, the things that should scare us the most is the idea that we can assemble the power to try and implement them. I think this type of wisdom, this humility, is something that we have to rescue. And that is the other side of the coin of radical uncertainty, is not believe your own lies that you can know everything about everything else. We must aim to be radical and disruptive. And we must try and harness the ability to spread freedom and prosperity. And try and be creative with, let us say, how we can empower everyday citizens with freedom and human dignity. We're doing an index of bureaucracy at the Center for Latin America of Atlas Network, which you can check out on our webpage. And part of the idea of the index of bureaucracy, hey state, don't manipulate me. You know, straight, just put the rules of the game and enforce them. But don't come in and try and tell me how to live my life with a gargantuan amount of rules and regulations that all they generate is a time tax. But in the case of Latin America, they generate a rent-seeking society where regulations become instruments of extortion. Even those that kidnap families and kidnap individuals, they're more honest. At least they call themselves kidnappers. Bureaucrats, they're almost stealth kidnappers, using rules and regulations in order to extort a rent, in order to extort a private, a mordida, or all these different folkloric names that they have throughout our countries. Anyway, there's a lot more that I could tell you. But also think that the emphasis on human progress, what Marion Kupi, Ian Vasquez, and others have done with this wonderful project, I think that's the way to go. I'd love to see something in Spanish, progresohumano.org, and the great stories of entrepreneurship that emerge even despite those bureaucracies, those caudillos, and that creeping statism that has kept the Americas, Latin America, behind for so many years. Naturally, all of this is the great challenge of communications, the power of storytelling. There's so many wonderful storytellers among the audience today. So, Brad Lips came out, our CEO at Atlas Network, with Liberalism and the Free Society, in which he states, well, you know, maybe 2021 is one of those dates, like 1989, or like other fundamental dates for the future of freedom. We have to restate our principles. Avoid getting trapped by the us versus them, by the ghost of neoliberalism, by all these useless debates. Let us restate what the rule of law means for us, and what should be. And everybody enjoying the same rights and obligations before the law. What the essence of liberal democracy is, and especially what Brad calls in his book the path forward, a movement of freedom and human dignity. Freedom is understood as whatever I can do, whatever I damn well please, as long as I'm not infringing on others' rights, and freedom, also a free society, in the 2021 as one that is based on flexibility, that is driven by innovation and by the disruption of the innovative process. Matt Ridley had a great book that he came out with last year on the nature of innovation. Social mobility as one of our main goals in social policy. Let us move past this us versus them debate concerning income inequality, and let us rather focus on social mobility. That is where simple rules for a complex world, as Richard Epstein would say, is going to make a difference that really makes a difference, especially for those families that live in moderate and extreme poverty. These are the engines of human progress. This is where our focus, our proactive and positive focus, should be on as we face the challenges amid radical uncertainty. As our senior fellow and the great Juan José Dabo, one of the great architects of the reforms in this Salvador in the first years of the 21st century, this is the time to push. This is the time to remove barriers that stand in the way of more prosperous and free societies. So Alejandra, I think I've taken too much time already. Muchas gracias. Les agradezco a todos, and thank you very much for coping even at from this Zoom-like distance from Mexico City.
Thank you, Roberto. We have time.
Thank you, Roberto Salinas. We are taking 2 questions here in the podium, please.
Hi, Roberto. This is Ken School, and I don't know if you were.
Hi, Ken. How are you? One of the great communicators. Your great communicators. We so admire. We so admire your work, Ken. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much. It's so great. I wish you could have been here in person to spend the whole weekend with us. It would have been fantastic. But thank you very much for speaking. One thing you mentioned about the hostility towards neoliberalism. Please tell me a little bit more about the source of that incredible hostility and what to do about it.
That's a great question. I think in the interest of time, I'll answer it quickly. It's something I've been writing about for many years. How to deconstruct the ghost of neoliberalism. Look, neo, post, pre, proto. I mean, or Manuel Ayala used to say, I'm not a neoliberal. Look at me, I'm old. I'm a paleoliberal. You're gonna put an annex or a suffix or whatever, just call me that. It sounds nicer than neoliberal. Neoliberalism gained a very bad term, I think mostly because it was identified with the Washington Consensus and the idea that know-it-all IMF officials or World Bank officials could come and impose up, down, de arriba hacia abajo, up, down, could impose a preconceived model where the expert technocrats would know how to do things and would know how to tailor fiscal policy, monetary policy, the regulatory environment, and whatnot. I think that accusation is unjust. But one person that I think hit the nail on the head as to the source of the discontent with this concept and the idea of the illuminated technocrat was Bill Easterly with the tyranny of experts. And the tyranny of experts includes those that think that because they study either at Chicago or at MIT or at Oxford or Harvard or whatever, our former finance minister here, Luis Videgaray, would counter arguments against him. Well, you're not an economist from MIT. I studied with James Paterba. How dare you question that? Which, by the way, is also, he would have failed Logic 101 as well. I mean, that's definitely a fallacious position. But I think it has to do with that part of the origin with the hostility towards neoliberalism is the fact that it was imposed by would-be technocrats that presume to know a lot more than you did. The other side of the coin of what we see with some of these liberal populists today. And the other is that I think it has been misidentified with crony capitalism. So when you see the privatizations, for instance, that were very popular in the 1980s and the 1990s in Latin America, are done, but they're done on the basis of who gets the 10% and how we're going to split, the kickback. And this comes out in public. Or when you privatize an industry like the banking industry in Mexico, and then all of a sudden you have a collapse of the financial system owing to the devaluation of 1995, and the government has to go and rescue the banks. And so, so we're going to privatize profits, but socialize losses. And I think there's something to that. So all these macroeconomic crises and these devaluations have also had a corollary of an intellectual devaluation of debate. And right now we've seen the perfect storm where these false narratives, together with a lot of popular anger and resentment, have produced something I never in my mind thought that a former member of Sendero Luminoso would be Prime Minister in Peru today. And he is. He's just been designated. Why did that happen? That's part of the challenge. We have to question ourselves. Why did we let this happen? Look, liberalism is liberalism. It's not neo, it's not Mexi, it's not left or right or up or down or center. It is what it is. Libertad is libertad, period. And that's the positive message. And that's the narrative that I think we have to seize on. Let us be conversational and not confrontational. And let us be the voices that speak on behalf of dialogue, dialectic, exchanging ideas in a free environment, and learning how to listen to others. I think that aspect of tolerance that Brad Lips touches upon in his book, Liberalism and Free Society, which you can download in the Atlas website. I think that's part and parcel of the great challenges that we face looking forward. I know that may not be a convincing answer to you, Ken. You've done a great deal in building the type of narratives that we need in order to address these challenges. The power of storytelling that you've taught all of us, and the importance of that storytelling. But I really think it's time to double down on that. So expect a lot more sequels to the Adventures of Jonathan Goliath. En español también.
Yes.
Hello, Roberto. This is Jose Cordeiro, and just a little correction. Andres Bello was not from Chile. He was from Venezuela. Very enlightening discussion about the view of the Latin Americans towards the USA. And I always think of the book, The Manual of the Perfect Latin American Idiot, that explains why we are so idiots. But also, my question is, don't you think it is part of the idea of the David versus Goliath complex that we have? We think the USA is so big, it's the Goliath, and here we are the little Davids in Latin America?
It's part, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Jose. By the way, un gran abrazo. The ubiquitous Jose Cordeiro that comes all the way from Spain, spends a week in lockdown in Panama in order to be able to make it to Freedom Fest. I mean, if there's an adventure in the world of freedom, it's Jose Cordeiro. It's wonderful that you have him there with you today to be able to share his experiences and his wisdom and his knowledge. Sorry for that correction, but after all, we're all Latino-Americanos, no? So Andres Bello is Venezuelan, but he's also Chilean and Mexican and Argentinian and Colombian, and is an inspiration, as many of our great classical liberal leaders from 200 years ago even to today are throughout our region. And so yes, the AntiYankismo has been a very convenient source of this perfect Latin American idiocy mentality that today seems to have spread even more in a more vicious manner than the Delta variant of COVID-19. But again, it's very accommodaticious, very accommodative. It's very convenient, right? So, oh yeah, the damn Yankees are the sources of all our problems. The same way that I guess Mexico seems to be a convenient bashing piñata for many American politicians. And that's the easy way out. But I think at the end of the day, if you want to see a good example of how a Latin American country can actually coexist in good terms or bad terms, in any terms, because of trade, it's Mexico. Many people don't seem to realize that Mexico is the #1 trading partner, the #1 trading partner of the United States. Something that would have been laughable if I had said this at a Liberty International conference back in 2002. I think that we met in somewhere in Mexico, or I can't remember, but I remember in the early days of NAFTA saying, oh, I would love to consider the fact that Mexico one day is the #1 trading partner of the United States. Ha ha ha! Well, guess what? That's the reality now. And that's not because of Mexico or because of the United States. That's because of the citizens and the forces of supply and demand and the role of free prices. Despite the fact that it's managed trade and whatever, it still has been an explosion of products that just dramatically changed the geoeconomic map of North America. And that has made, especially the North of Mexico, almost like an entirely different country, almost like a second world country, where you've had China-style growth rates in places like Sonora, Baja California, Chihuahua, even Tamaulipas, riddled with all the, half of Tamaulipas is a failed region because of the narco trafficking and whatnot. And I think the same thing you're beginning to see in Colombia. Colombia has emerged as a major player in world trade thanks to the policy of open trade. So, of course, we can do so. And of course, one of the things to deconstruct is that anti-Yankee mentality And imagine ourselves as Russ Roberts does, or as Martin Krause in Argentina does, imagining all the great opportunities that have come about because of the United States. Let's make Miami, Jose. It's Venezuelans like yourself, it's Cubans, it's Argentinians, it's Mexicans, it's the Latin Americans that have sought a place where they can be freer than their own countries. By the way, our Latin America, our Liberty, Forum, and Freedom dinner, and Alice is here, is going to be in Miami.
Roberto, good to see you again. I'm Jeff Singer. You may remember we were on a colloquium back in February. And I would like you to talk about, as you know, Stephen Davies and others have said that the entire West, not just Latin America, is going through a realignment. And so we have a situation, for example, where in the United States, people, paradoxically, have been called conservatives, have generally been associated with more with free trade, free markets, and kind of classical liberal sensibilities, and they've been changing too. So now there's this infatuation that many in the conservative movement have with Viktor Orban of Hungary, and many people who have been associated with the left are suddenly starting to find that they have some liberal sensibilities in common with people who have been associated with right, and it's like there's a big swirl going on, and different realignments are forming. So I'd like you to just discuss that in the context of what you've been talking about.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great question as well, a great observation. But I think it reinforces the point that we have to look beyond left or right, and no longer think that that is the, let's say, the dual framework where we can neatly categorize one position or the other. In our ranks, there are enormous differences concerning our views of the family, the role of central banking, whether there is any role whatsoever, or currency competition. Even on crypto, there's a healthy debate between, let's say, people that claim that what Salvador has done in embracing Bitcoin is good for freedom, and others like Manuel Heinz himself and Steve Hanke that say, no, that's just a disaster and it's going to lead nowhere. But at least there's a debate in the sense that debate is properly understood, in the sense of a dialogue, civilized conversation where you can have a lot of differences, but we agree that we're going to disagree. And we're going to do it in the interest of pursuing the truth, not of creating the image that we are the owners of the truth, but in actually pursuing at least a greater approximation to what is reality. So we have to move beyond those etiquetas, those very convenient labels that actually do a great deal, unfortunately, to cancel discourse, to cancel reason discourse. Now, these phenomena that you mentioned, I think are fascinating of how you see there seems to be a realignment of the intellectual factors that some public intellectuals and voices in public discourse have in common, right? And all of a sudden, those that you cannot talk to are, it certainly has happened, as some of you may know, with those in the conservative faction that continue to hold near and dear to the Trump ideals. Well, Trump didn't have very nice things to say about Mexicans, and so he's not very popular. But guess what? He had a great understanding with Lopez Obrador. This used to be like best buddies. The only trip that Lopez Obrador has done abroad has been to Washington to go see Trump. And yet with Biden, you would think, okay, they're both more like left wing. Yeah, but there's been tension, and there's been back and forth, and there's been defiance. There's that AntiYankismo, that anti-Yankee sentiment that Jose was sharing with us. He's tried to exploit it now with the Biden administration. So you see how, or with Orban is another great example. Is it law and order? Is it orden y progreso? It reminds me of some of the debates that we had in Latin America between liberals and conservatives, where the conservatives were the pro-freedom voices versus the liberals that assumed, let's say, a scientific, science of society attitude of Agus Ponte and we're going to build society from scratch. That doesn't sound classical liberal to me, right? But then again, so these realignments are fascinating, but at the end of the day, I come back to the same point. We have to restate our principles. And we have to restate them in a manner that shows, like Manuel Hines has tried to do in defense of liberal democracy. It's not that ours are eternal truths that only we have privileged access to. It's rather, these are common sense principles that simply let us get ahead. Who knows more economics than a market familia in Latin America? Not even the most educated central bank in Latin America knows more about how to manage scarcity than a mother who lives in conditions of poverty in Latin America. So let's empathize with that human action and with that common sense. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the regular men and women that work every day to try and get ahead, that aspire to a better life. And let's make things easier for them. And that's why Paco said, I think he's absolutely right. Left or right, up or down, us versus them, ideology, whatever. Conservative, liberal, whatever. Look, just remove the barriers to trade and let me be free. Déjame trabajar.